I'm just going to, like I do, I seem like I need to just sort of get myself settled every Monday morning and figure out where I am in this body. Well, I just came back. I have to go out in the morning and get my morning coffee, and I never know what happens. And so as I was stopping at the post office, I saw two women waiting at the bus stop, and I said, "Oh, they look familiar." And they were they're two Afghan women who are in my group that I have on Saturdays. Once or twice a month, we have a support group for the Afghan women in my neighborhood, because most of them are home alone, isolated because their husbands are working. But in this case, these two women came to this country alone. I think they left their husbands in Afghanistan. So I said, "Where are you going?" And they said, "To work." And they were waiting for a bus to go to work at the local bagel shop. So I don't know. I was just struck with what their lives may be, what their lives are like, and what they left behind, and the challenges they have. And you never know. I just kept thinking about, we look at bus stops and people waiting for buses and what their lives are like. And just saying hello, I think, brought a smile to their faces. So there was something about that moment that was so simple and poignant, and yet poignant. And it's the community that we create, and there's more behind that. But anyways, that's what came to me this morning. I want to welcome everyone. Don't know Mike, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what he is going to share this morning. And it sounds like it's pretty profound. So I just want to wish everybody hello. And Mike, thank you for joining us today.
I'm very glad to be here.
Lynn is going to say hello. And then we have a lot of hellos.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome, Mike.
So we have Mike McCullough today from New York City, a neighbor of many of you. He's a political scientist who has been focusing with us every week on Thursdays. We meet for Jean Genlin's line-by-line commentary to Aristotle's De Anima. And that is the text that inspired Mike's presentation today and Dave's presentation on July 14 and Gisela Uhl's presentation on July 4th. The thread of Aristotle reaching right into today's world is something to behold. And Mike presents us with practical ways that we might actually have democracy in the world, fairness and mutual respect, collaboration. So he has traveled and been in countries where there is much oppression, and he has a wealth of experience and very excellent writings. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Katerina. Let me just start by making the link to Aristotle and the group that's been meeting Thursday mornings. What's of interest here is the connection that Jean Genlin makes with Aristotelian concepts, namely that he mentions Stuart Kaufman, who is a theoretical biologist who works with the Santa Fe Institute about complexity. And he notes that Aristotle's views of matter are similar to what complexity theorists are looking at nowadays. Precisely that there's some kind of internal force at work that is what complexity theorists would call self-organizing. And so there's a fascinating line of inquiry open there to look at the ways that Gene Gentlin's work ties in with complexity theorists and the notion of self-organizing. I'm going to have my own particular way of incorporating the concept of self-organizing. And Katerina also mentioned that I have been in contact with oppression outside the United States. What she's referring to is that in 1968, I joined the Peace Corps and went to Brazil at a time when Brazil was governed by a military dictatorship that was really ruthless and draconian. And that experience really is what inspired me to get into, ultimately, to get into the kind of concepts that I'm working with right now. So I've been, for several years, I've been developing what I call a complexity theory of power, and it combines power theory and complexity theory, and it's an effort to develop a framework for the empirical analysis of power conflicts. I'm going to present 3 instances of how this applies to so-called complexity theory of power. And the first one is going to be not at the interpersonal level, but at the societal level, and that will be the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955 and 1956. It's an historical instance of a successful empowerment in the face of extremely powerful opposition. And the other 2 instances that I'm going to look at are small scale interpersonal conflicts that I hope will be of interest to those of you who are counselors. And during the breakout period, I suggest that you identify a power conflict or power conflicts that involve at least 2 opposing parties, and that you test whether any of these notions I'm raising here can be of use in analyzing those conflicts. At the outset here, please bear with me as I lay out the conceptual basis of the theory. I definitely don't want to be just focusing on abstract, conceptual, theoretical issues. Ultimately, I'm most interested in empirically grounded theory and how it can shed light on conflict resolution. And is there a way that we can get the PowerPoint slides? Let's see. I don't know why I'm not seeing. I have PowerPoint open here.
Would you like me to show the first one?
Maybe if this isn't connecting, Katerina, we may have to do that. Okay, one of the paths for integrating power theory and complexity theory is to just take a couple of core concepts from each theory and see how they can merge. And the 2 concepts I'm borrowing from power theory are power over, the power with, where power over. And I'm going to use the convention that power theorists often use, and that is they refer to actor A and actor B. So we can speak about A exercising power over B. And in power theory has tended to focus sometimes exclusively on the power over notion. And what is missing sometimes is a focus on the power with part of power, where parties A and B actually collaborate and cooperate with one another. And what I'm going to link to in complexity theory are the focus on self-organization or self-organizing processes, and on disorganization and disorganizing processes. And as I say at the bottom of this slide, in this view, power exercised by one party to dominate another is a disorganizing process. And power exercised by different parties to collaborate with one another is a self-organizing process. And Katerina, if you move to the next slide, please. And another perspective that we can gain from complexity is a focus on order and disorder, and to see two very actually polar opposites in physical science. I'll just read this quote from Fritjof Capra, who is a physicist and who has an excellent book on the web of life, talking about how complexity theory introduces a revolutionary new view of order and disorder. And I'm reading from Capra: this new perception of order and disorder represents an inversion of traditional scientific views. According to the classical view, that's the Newtonian view of physics, order is associated with equilibrium. But in the new science of complexity, we learned that non-equilibrium is a source of order. In living systems, the order arising from non-equilibrium is far more evident, being manifest in the richness, diversity, and beauty of life all around us. Throughout the living world, chaos is transformed into order. And so we see these polar opposites here, where from the equilibrium point of view, that's associated with order. But in the new, that we can see as a mechanistic model of nature, the Newtonian model. And it shifts from being merely mechanical to mechanistic when people try to model human affairs as a machine. And so I'm going to, wherever that happens, I'm going to call it mechanistic. And let's see, Katerina, could you move to the next? And this is sort of a paradigm for looking at a clash or possibility, a path of cooperation for two actors, A and B. On the left side of this quadrant, we have the mechanistic viewpoint, and on the right side is the self-organizing viewpoint. The framework that I have here, in other words, has us looking at things both from the perspective of actor A and actor B. And reading the upper left corner there, order in A's view, in the view of A, ensues as long as B responds obediently and without question. Power imposed achieves a very real equilibrium-oriented order, but it is a mechanistic human order. It mechanizes human relationships. It is a so-called order. We go to the lower right, we're looking at the way that actor B, who's subjugated to power, sees this situation. And as B sees it, to be pressed toward equilibrium is the inverse of an orderly process. It is incapacitating and disorganizing. And if we go to the lower left there, from B's point of view, or from A's point of view, who's exerting power over B, any kind of autonomous action taken by B to question, to disobey, to resist, is to disrupt A's order, to generate disequilibrium and disorder. And self-organization comes into the upper right corner here, where if B succeeds in exercising power on equal terms with A, that is, if A collaborates with B, the end result is an enhanced state of self-organization. So this is sort of the paradigm framework that I'm going to apply to the three instances. Now, I'm not tracking time here, but please let me know if I'm getting towards 4 or 5 minutes left so I can end this without going over my time. So Katerina, could you, okay, in the Montgomery bus boycott, we see an excellent example of how there's a transition takes place from an oppressive situation where we had Jim Crow culture segregating blacks and whites. And I'll read in the upper left corner, from the perspective of those whites who believed in their racial superiority over blacks, the inequality evident in racially segregated seating in public buses reflected an unquestionable natural order of things. That is, the segregationists had an ideology that made them absolutely certain about their path being right or moral. And we go to lower right, we see that the Black community of Montgomery, however, judged seating rules on public buses to be a disorder. Their withdrawal of cooperation through the boycott actively confronted Jim Crow's so-called order. And this amounted to autonomous action that was first triggered by Rosa Marks' refusal to get out of her seat and to obey the segregationist law. They, of course, viewed Rosa Parks' disobedience as a source of far from equilibrium disorder, triggering the punitive forces aimed at restoration of Jim Crow order, hence her arrest and booking. But in the upper right corner, we see self-organization was achieved through racial equality under the law. The 381-day bus boycott created a bifurcation or power structuring crisis whose outcome was to open and socially democratize a closed seating system, replacing it on a national scale with bus seating characterized by freedom of choice and greater self-organization. So We go to the next slide, please, Katerina. Okay, this few years ago, when I was at my grocery store, I just one second. I saw, or I was at the cashier. The woman cashier at my grocery store was scanning and bagging my items, and at the same time, there was a coworker sweeping the floor, and he came up to her location, at the cashier's location, and needed to sweep, and he said, "Move." That is, he kind of ordered her to move, and that's all he said. And this one, the cashier, this woman said, "Move? What do you mean move? Can't you be a little polite?" So, she was right on top of this. She had, I guess we would say, in the focusing world, an intuitive, felt bodily sense, that something, that this guy who was sweeping the floor had crossed over a boundary. And the guy didn't react to that. He just kept on sweeping. He didn't say anything. And at this point, the cashier started speaking with another cashier, a neighboring cashier. And she said, "Move." He says, "Move." Do we move because he says so? Isn't there a nice way to ask? So, we see in this example, a coworker somehow expected her to obey without question. I'm at the upper left part of the quadrant. And if she was to succumb, the coworker would have imposed a very real equilibrium-oriented order, but a mechanistic order, or a so-called order. And of course, she immediately saw that this violated a certain standard of humane conduct. And I didn't see the outcome of this clash. I wonder, looking at the upper left corner, what the prospects for self-organizing and equal interaction taking place here would have been. But it looked, as I left it, the conflict was still ongoing, and the disequilibrium persisted. And so that's one way of looking at an instance of an interpersonal interaction using this framework. Katerina, could we move to the next framework? Okay, a wife breaking free of an abusive husband. This instance was inspired for me in watching a movie called Sleeping with the Enemy with Julia, what's her name? Famous actress.
Roberts.
Yeah, Julia Roberts starred in this movie, sleeping with the enemy. And this kind of power conflict we see fits quite easily into this framework where the husband, looking at the upper left corner, the husband expects the wife to obey without question. And if the wife succumbs, the husband imposes a very real equilibrium-oriented order, but it is a mechanistic human order. It mechanizes human relationship. We can say it's a so-called order, not a real order based in human relationships. And the lower right, as the wife sees it, to be pressed toward equilibrium is the inverse of an orderly process. It is incapacitating and disorganizing. For the wife, for the wife to take some autonomous action, however, is to question, disobey, or resist, and to disrupt the husband's order to generate disequilibrium and disorder. In the movie, the way it gets resolved is that this woman manages to escape her husband. And theoretically, we could look at the prospect that there was actually some conflict resolution achieved by the husband and wife, so that there's some sort of self-organization and equality. This is another view of the same movie, and one of the common things that occurs from the mechanical perspective is that there's a very strict dogmatic ideological order governing the role of those who exercise power over others. And, you know, if we look for a justification of slavery, we can find that in the Bible. If we look for a justification of male dominance, we can also find that in the Bible. We see here the quote in the upper left corner, "Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord." So this kind of conflict with absolutes is quite typical of many power conflicts. But you know, we see this framework also fitting well here. But I think we can, I don't know what comes next. Do we have a general discussion and then go to the breakout session? Or do we go right to the breakout session?
Do you like give some
yeah.
time for people to maybe talk about it a bit? Maybe questions for you, Mike?
Excuse me if sometimes I have a problem hearing, but I actually
Yeah.
have.
So
actually
maybe
have
somebody
hearing.
has something you like to say for Mike or ask about before the breakout.
I say, good.
Yeah.
You know, we often have a discussion about what's presented, and I think a lot was arising in many people about this idea of order and what we mean by order, and Jenlin's deep belief in a kind of organic order that is also reflected in complexity theory. So we want to just give anyone a chance to say whatever is on your mind after these thoughts.
Hi, Lynn. and Michael and Katharina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Hi. I'm just struck by what it brings up in me around the complexity of self, the inner critic and beliefs that I would have. I'm certainly coming out of, I suppose, conditioning of a religious background, so that it's that those dominant unexamined beliefs around, trying to reclaim equilibrium in self first, so I'm just really excited that I feel like that I'm coming out and gaining equilibrium. And I think that there's something about society's force or mindset as well, so those two, I suppose, relationships, before there's even the beginning of a resolution. So just wanted to, and thank you. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I wonder if you could give us an example of that inner struggle for equilibrium or the kind of order. It reminds me of Greg Madison's Inner Democracy. And that's very evocative. I just wonder if you could give us an instance of that.
I think it's a sort of in the whole processing, I think that the resolution comes from the understanding of self and presence is the force that is kind of outside of time and space in some way, so it's the example is the processing, the continuous processing to and I have a sense that we aren't free until we actually become conscious of all of that, that as a child and adolescent, we have internalized those power struggles, so very aware and yeah, and I think there are some models of the internal family systems and all of the rest. So I think it's a new kind of a person, really, that we have become with self and presence and all the work with focusing. Yeah. So, yeah. I hope that answers it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question. What I don't get is obviously if what may bring self equilibrium to one person unsettles someone else. So I'm not sure what you're saying about that, whether it's a couple and a woman, quote unquote, standing up to her husband, or the other way around, or the what happens to the unsettling of the other person. I'm not sure what you're saying about that. And then if that stays unsettled, it's further unsettling in a different way for the first person, right?
Well, I think, of course, these conditions can persist, and they might be in the ideal world, they can be resolved, but there's always going to be some, or there's usually some kind of continuation of uncertainty under any circumstance. But you talk about the unsettling of the other person. What would be could you spell that out a little more? Are you talking about two people in a power relationship of some sort?
I suppose it could be that, whether it's people at work, and right. I mean, just when one person does what they need to do to create their um, internal rightness and stability may be very off-putting for the other person. And what happens with that?
Yeah. Oh. You want to say something here?
Absolutely.
Well, I was thinking of the Montgomery bus boycott. I think that at first, many whites didn't accept the change. They complied with it because it was forced on them. They had been in the role of forcing on Black people an order, which was oppressive and disorganizing. When it turned upside down and Black people asserted themselves and created a new order, it took a while for many whites, I think, to accommodate and adapt to this change.
Mhm.
It was not an overnight thing. And who knows, even with the racism we see today, it's not even clear that even as yet, what many whites have accepted the change. So I think the assertion by B against the oppressive action of A, power over, is only a first step, right? The ultimate goal, of course, is to create true collaborative power between human beings who love and respect each other. But that is a process. And I think that that's a whole thing that maybe needs to be eventually elucidated further, in my opinion. It's not automatic, but some disruption of A is necessary, right? It can't, otherwise you're just submitting to the mechanistic order. Anyway, I don't know if Mike wants to pick up on that or.
Yeah, I would just say that, in the new direction of the science that Fritjof Capra is talking about, there's permanent uncertainty. There's always some loose strings and things. We never achieve perfection. It's the old model, the mechanistic model that actually seeks absolute perfection. And of course, there's intolerance of recognizing uncertainty in that situation. But the new science requires that we not try to eliminate uncertainty, but just to reduce it.
I come back to the analogy. I'm sorry, somebody else was.
I was just gonna say Rosa has her hand up.
Oh, good.
Go for it, Lynn. I'll speak after you. And I saw that Charles also wanted to respond to Michael.
I'm on my iPad, so I can't see the subtleties here. It was Mary that brought up the inner struggle for power, right? And I was thinking about how Freud really believed in the mechanism idea of equilibrium, and talked about where therapy is as where ego will be, and the ego, the executive function, dominates the primitive drives in Freud's theory. And then there was a whole revolution in psychology and in psychoanalysis, and saying, well, these parts of ourselves, or these aspects of ourselves that are revolting, or that are causing the trouble, that need to be heard, they need to be understood. And those of us who practice a focusing orientation and therapy. Jean would say of the voice in the person that seems destructive. Oh, it's good to hear from that. It's important to hear from that. And the what we want in the inner democracy isn't one part of the self to dominate another, but for the conflict within to be able to be spilled out and as generative, that this conflict is going to bring.
That's an exciting concept, inner democracy.
Lynn, I think you froze.
Yeah,
Um,
she did.
okay. I wanted to kind of, while we're waiting for her to come back, I wanted to kind of reflect a little bit this, Lynn? Oh,
Yeah.
you're okay.
Sorry,
You
Rose.
get frozen for a moment. Go for it.
No, that was it. I want to hear from you, Rosa.
Well, I just wanted to reflect back how I felt the conversation flowing, because it feels very exciting to me right now. So first of all, I want to thank you so much. Dr. McCullough, I came here a little late, so I was in the middle of when you were talking about the Foursquare, right before you started to show the slides, and I really appreciate the pattern you were showing with a lot of different examples. And then someone asked about inner democracy, and then Charles, you were, or no, someone else before you, but still the conversation went to this thing about like, well, what happens to A, right? When this thing gets, when B starts to rebel. And so, and then Charles, you were saying that as you see it, it's an ongoing process. And then Michael, you were saying that something along the lines, I wasn't taking notes, so I don't have all of this, but something along the lines that it's an ongoing process, right? It's an ongoing process. And so two things. The first thing is I was thinking about how without that sense of ongoing process, I don't know, but you know that thing that people say about like the people who engage in the revolution can then become the new dominant kind of an order, and B can just replace A. And I mean, talking about social terms, right? And so we don't want that. We don't want, you know, a new despot. We want some kind of partnership process. And but how do we do that in a way where the transitions are more fruitful? And so along those lines, the second thing I wanted to say is that this distinction of power with and power over, it was first, I'm really into women's history right now. It was first, the first person who came up with it was Mary Parker Follett, and she was not very well known, or she was very well known in her day, and then she was forgotten about, and now she is much more well known now, or starting to become well known now. And she's still ahead of our time. She was way ahead of her time in the past. But she has this quote, which I'd love to read, which is about the ongoingness of all of this, right? So she talked a lot about integration and the process of unifying and all that. And so she says the most important thing to remember about unity is that there is no such thing. There is only unifying. You cannot get unity and expect it to last a day or 5 minutes. And then her second quote is just incredibly beautiful. I think she talks about the surge of life sweeps through the given similarity, the common ground, and breaks it up into 1,000 differences. This tumultuous, irresistible flow of life is our existence. The unity, the common, is but for an instant. It flows on to new differings which adjust themselves anew in fuller, more varied, richer synthesis. The moment when similarity achieves itself as a composite of working, seething forces, it throws out its myriad new differings. The torrent flows into a pool, works, ferments, and then rushes forth until all is again gathered into the new pool of its own unifying. This is the process of evolution.
Wow, that is
Beautiful.
wonderful.
Yeah. So I just hope to inspire you all to read her because, as I said, she's still very, very relevant to our time today. Thank you.
Can you put that in the chat for us?
That's what Mike is describing as the non-mechanistic order, the emergent, flowing, ever regenerating, far from equilibrium order is what she's describing.
Mhm.
To me, that's what beautifully, poetically describing
Mhm.
alternative to a mechanistic order. The emergent, ever evolving. What Jean once used the phrase, the infinitely unfolding implicit.
Mm.
So there have been some.
Rosa still want to speak, or is your hand still up, Rosa?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And now there'll be time for reading with your breakout partner. Sensing something that is a power conflict. Mike, you like people to say again what you want us to do during the breakout room?
Yeah, I would just, anybody can go with what they're inspired, what the term power inspires them to think about. It doesn't have to fit into the conceptual framework that I set with that quadrant. But, if you were to use that framework, I would just ask you, to pick, what it could be an interpersonal relationship between two people. It could be more of a group interaction, like in the workplace, but to look for inequality situations where power is being somehow imposed, and to consider the various paths of conflict resolution, to include an opening process, open to uncertainty, open to questioning, but I would suggest to people just go look at the word power, what it means to you, and how we best, what's going to help us in trying to describe what power is, and to acknowledge that power is not just, it's not exercised only when people are in kind of a vertical power relationship, but conflict resolution, brings people together in an equal towards greater equality. Not, I don't want to say towards equality, like democracy. Equality is one of these big dream concepts that I think is going to be facing everybody generation after generation. We never achieve perfection. But we could use a lot of radical change nevertheless.
And Christine, are you doing the breakout room? Or would you
Yes.
like? Yes, she is.
Anybody needs to leave the meeting, if you could please leave before the breakout rooms.
And we'll come back at 9:30, right? And resume our whole group discussion of what was evoked in the breakout room.
And if you have any requests, you can, I think Dorothy, you're going to leave early. That's fine. Still lots of time.
I'm gonna be in the breakout room and leave right after the breakout room.
Mhm.
Okay, Christine?
So then,
Yes.
Mike, you have it.
Yeah,
Did you go for a
Lynn,
walk
Lynn
or
asked me
have
if I wanted to join breakout room, and I thought that I would be sort of an imposing figure in,
You could just
in
stay here if you like, or you could go for a walk. Or
You ask me something, Mike?
back at 9:30 for sure.
Mike, were you
I think-
talking to me, asking me something?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think I'll skip going to the breakout room
Yeah.
myself.
You just
Yeah.
click the button that says not now. And then,
Okay.
yeah.
Mike, I just want to express my appreciation. It's you're presenting these ideas is very exciting, and hoping we can dialogue more about it.
Yeah, very much so. This is a powerful premise that this whole group is built upon, and in a creative sense, clearly. And I thank you very much for the opportunity.
I just wanted to relate to you that I brought Jane Genlin a paper by Bill Coburn about complexity theory and the use of it in psychoanalysis. And it was a very dense paper.
Mhm. And who was the author again?
Coburn.
Coburn. Do you happen in the Aristotle book, Gene refers to both Stuart Kaufman and somebody named Ellis, Ellis. And I was trying.
R.D. Ellis, yes.
I was trying to find
And he
who
made
that.
an anthology, and even Jean Genlin has a chapter in the anthology by Ellis.
I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi is a little scanty here. Anyway, just to finish that, I gave Gene this paper and he read it and underlined things, and he was fascinated with it and said, oh, I see he's this complexity, the way that he's writing about complexity theory fits very well with my ideas of emergence and I forget exactly what he said, but it was a thrilling experience to me to share that with Gene and for him to just gobble it up.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I'm gonna be looking up Coburn.
Christine, we have that paper complexity theory made simple, right? We could put that in the chat for people and all.
Well, I mean, it's a whole thing. You know that it's the PowerPoint, it's the whole thing would be good to, I can't put all that in the chat, but I could certainly email it to anybody who's interested.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
announce.
Okay.
Well, you can put Coburn complexity theory made simple, just that for people to look that up if
Okay.
they want to, and we can email it to people.
Okay. And just to be sure, we're coming back at 9:30 or 9:35?
9:30.
Okay, that's what I thought.
We usually come back at 9:30, but
Okay.
I'm going to go warm up my coffee here.
good idea. Katerina, thank you again so much for this series. It's a very exciting series that you put together.
And how they tie together so beautifully.
Yes.
Yeah. So Claiborne is the name of your author.
No, Coburn. What is
Sorry.
it? K-U. How do you spell Coburn, Christine?
B-U-R-N.
Yeah,
William Coburn.
William Coburn.
I tried that first. Coburn.
William. C-O-B-U-R-N.
C-O.
Psychoanalytic complexity theory.
You know what, Katerina, if I can find it, I will send it to you. Okay. I always have it in my fingertips because it's been sent out so many times.
Yes, I know. I think we have it in Dropbox. We could probably send them people the Dropbox link.
Here it is.
And the slideshow is great there too.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, that's what I want to send them, the whole thing.
Yeah, maybe we could even ask him actually to come to the helpers group and talk about psychoanalytic complexity theory and make those connections with Denlin's work. That would be exciting.
Yeah.
I think he's in California though, which always is a big problem.
It's loading. It's coming.
How are you this morning, Christine?
Okay. Still congested or whatever.
Mm.
Very strange. How's everything out there? It was raining here.
It's not raining, but it's a little cloudy.
Let me see. This thing is not trending. I'll get it this time. Should we
Ellen
call
has-
on- Okay.
Yeah. Ellen has, should I, we're not recording now, right?
Yeah, we are.
Oh.
Yes. Yes. Did you
Hello.
close rooms, Christine? Christine, are you there, Christine?
I am. I'm here.
Rooms closed. People are coming back.
Hello. That horrible notice has come up on my screen again about a 9:45 meeting that never goes away. Hi, welcome back. Oh, Abby is here. And Rachel, good morning, Rachel.
Morning.
Whoop.
Oh. Hmm.
How was it? What did you discover?
And Zhijing is here, Olivia, Sophie. So welcome back, and we're eager to hear what your experience was.
I wanted to say something interesting that emerged in our group, which is that whenever there's the mechanical imposed order, there's almost invariably something in us that rebels against it. Like there's, and sometimes it rebels in not necessarily initially productive way, although it's sometimes it's just because for the true new emergent order, the alternative order that Mike was talking about, there needs to be some space for that to happen. But we almost always, when we're told to move, something in our bodies says, no, I'm not going to be treated that way. And it's inevitable in our nature, I would say, that there's going to be a force that reacts against the imposition of power over. So that needs to be included in the theory, I think, is the part of us that rebels against the coercive order.
Charles, I would love to build on that. And just to say that as human beings, we are self-organizing complex systems. And so I was Googling Michael's work because I'm so excited about what he's saying. And I came across a blog post that he wrote about anthropocentric political science, which I'm really excited about because, and I think Jean would be hugely excited about, right? Because I think he was always talking about how would education change? How would hospitals change? How would whatever change if we recognized the inside of human beings, if we recognized the humanness of human beings? And so Michael is wanting to have political science recognize the humanness of human beings, right? So yeah, that yes to what you said, Charles. Thank you.
And also, Jean, the process model was never only about human beings. It was, right? It included animals, and yeah.
Right, because I think, well, from a focusing perspective, which I think is a complexity perspective as well, there's no hard and fast line between human beings and everything else, right?
Correct. And I think Mike would agree.
It's like we depend on being able to breathe. We depend on gravity. We depend on air. We depend on the trees. It's like depending, meaning we are continuously interacting with. So it's an imaginary line that says, I don't know. I don't want to get way philosophical because that's not my forte, but there's a very deep inherent, I don't know, like Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing. So anyway, I'll be quiet now.
I love
There's a title. There's a title for an essay that I've long wanted to write, but I have not. And it would be called Human Rights, Natural Rights. That is, are we born with certain rights? Do we have rights merely because we've been born with them? And I think what you're implying here is that indeed there's some sort of um, inherent sense that we have about what our rights are. And we don't often hear about our rights until they get violated. You know, when they get, when there's a violation of our rights, we know it, we feel it. And, you know, this woman at the grocery store, she had no hesitance about when the guy said to her, move, you know, she wasn't taking any nonsense from him. She immediately, you know, felt that something had gone wrong in a human relationship. And I think it's something that we're all born with and feel. We don't always react as immediately as this woman reacted.
I'm wondering if Vivian or maybe even Olivia or Abby could talk about if that's true in the East as well as the West. And Vivian, do people have in China an inherent sense of an intrinsic order that isn't the order that's imposed?
I would say the imposed order is intrinsic. It's already there. It's like in the culture, in the blood. And yeah, so I think it's more difficult to be aware of that limits and constraint, and it probably takes more energy and yeah, everything to really to run away from that control. I think, you know, it's in the culture. It's not, you know, only in the family or between, you know, a small group of people. It's in the environment. Maybe Olivia and Abby can share. It's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian.
I feel like the cultural fabric of shame and harmony. So it's almost like there's a web that like seeps into the individual so deeply that like even childhood in schools, like discipline is one of the first things that's drilled into kindergarteners. So I think like the foundation and then the social fabric, it's like different energy webs that seeps onto people. It makes it very hard to have the spaciousness for inner reflection and finding that individuality. And also the economic pressures, right? It's a lot higher scarcity of resources. So a lot more limitations and less space.
I don't feel comfortable talking about anything politically sensitive in public. And I also don't know what really is in general. I only know my own personal experience.
Yes.
And I don't feel confident to comment in a societal level as well, because I have my own specific situation and my close people I directly interact with. I don't feel I have a broader view to share in that aspect.
Yes, thank you, Olivia.
But I do have something personal to share. And it's very touching. I was surprised by what come up for me. I really appreciate Rosa share that it's not a fixed state, like a unified. It's a unifying process. And that bring me a lot of relief. Like, oh, and I realized I have this hidden expectation for after the conflict, I'm always looking for that harmony, that unifying, then we're set, right? It's unified. Then it's like, nope, it's a process. But it gives me some room to breathe and knowing that I am part of the process. And I also have my part to participate in shaping that. And in the group, I recognize how much I have been shaking the others in a way, unexpectedly. Just this thing just couldn't help but come out. And in the past, I always feel uncomfortable when I'm the only one. I feel like I'm usually the black sheep everywhere I go, interestingly, and find that sense of abrupt difference. And when it's named, even with compassion and nothing intrusive to others, just to say something different than the assumed order that's already established, is really vulnerable, edgy for me. But I just somehow inevitably find myself in those situations, and I still feel uncomfortable being in that position. But it gives me some appreciation for what that may actually do in a bigger, good way, with that kind of disruption of the order, established order, that sometimes I do see if the way it's shown up is right and the container, the people can hold it together, it actually emerged to something better for many people. But it does take time and takes a lot of skill and compassion for everyone to be in it, to have the change happen. So I also acknowledge that sense of process. Sometimes it's not easy, especially anything not even harmful, just abrupt can be a shocking thing. And the last piece I want to share is in my group, I just feel so touched hearing the other person's experience. And I realize how much all those abrupt disturbance of the existing order I brought to my own family. In a way, it's like not deliberately trying to mess up with things, but just like announce to my parents, I'm going to quit my PhD and I'm getting married with this man in a day, in the same conversation. And things like that, just like how much they need to adjust for a lot of change, a lot of different choices I made for my life, but I realized inherently the connection with them, and what they may be going through with those sudden change in order. And they never really much explicitly share with me, but little by little, from hearing other parents' experience with their children, I began to kind of open up to that. Wow, I really feel a lot of appreciation and admiration for my parents for joining me on this adventure and keep allowing the ordering, the self-organizing for us as a family. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it's time for us to close, right? And
before we do that, Lynn, I just so want to say just a few words. I wasn't going to speak again, but I was so moved by what Olivia said, and I just want to take it and expand it to the societal level, because something I've been seeing in myself that has been new and surprising is realizing that we need to have compassion for people in our culture who have been having a hard time adapting to all the change, right? Like the transgender this and the climate crisis and the, It's like so much change. And as progressive people, we haven't necessarily always had that compassion for what it's like to have so much change happen. And so there's a way that I feel it's so important that we help each other along, because I think that, some of the, some of the wokeness, et cetera, can be counterproductive when it's self-righteous or when it's blaming, so there's all these societal dynamics about how change gets introduced. And we as progressives are in the position, don't want to be assuming everybody here is a progressive, but generally in focusing circles, that's often a predominance. We are in the position in society that Olivia has been in her family, right? Like, well, here's something new, and here's something new, and here's something new. And so I think we need to understand, I'm not trying to justify the backlash. I'm not trying to any of that, but it's just a little bit of compassion for what it's like to go through so much change. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Katerina. And thank you so much, Mike. And I'm hoping we'll continue with this theme. And next week, we are going to be led by Annette, and looking forward to that. And I'll see you all next week, right? Bye. Have a wonderful week.